Hi there, my name's Simon from CramTheExam and welcome to week 7, day 1 of your 12-week preparation course to get you ready for your FCE CAE and Matura Advanced exam. Today's Monday, it's the beginning of week 7 as I said, which means that we're looking at writing, and we're going to have another look at FCE articles and CAE proposals, much in the same way that we did last week with essays. So the first thing I'm going to do is say to you, if you haven't seen my video from week 2, which goes through the basics of FCE articles and FCE proposals and the resources available to you on the internet, make sure you watch that video first, because we're going to use the resources in that video in this video. So in particular, if you haven't seen the Ruben Valero website for the FCE article and the CAE proposal, please check it out, because I'm going to use the information on that website to help you prepare an answer for the questions we're going to have a look at today. Don't worry, the links are in the video description below. Also in the video description below are links to the online questions that we're going to be discussing in this video. So make sure you click on those links, have a look at the questions, so you know what I'm going to talk about in this video. Okay, and I'm going to do this very quickly. I'm just going to use the structure there, use the information on those websites, put together the most simple information and show you how you can structure an answer to the article or to the proposal based on the information you've got there. And I'm going to try and make it trying to present this in such a way that it's really easy for you to make a plan and to structure your answer and to do the best, create the best possible answer that you can. So let's get stuck into it. Okay, so we're going to start off first by looking at the FCE article question. This is the question I've taken from the page which you can see in brackets, examenglish.com. So, articles wanted for our new page on family life. Are you an only child, or do you have brothers and sisters? Are you the oldest, the youngest, or a middle child? What are the advantages of being in your place in the family? What are the disadvantages? Do you wish you had fewer or more siblings? Have you always felt this way? Now, there's a lot going on in that question, but if you've practiced making plans, then you should already see everything that you need to include. Let me explain. Because you should be thinking about something like this. And this is from the information on that Ruben Valero webpage, so make sure you go and check it out if you haven't checked it out. So this is the structure for an FCE article. You've got to remember, the register is going to be informal or personal. So we're looking for not formal language, but rather informal, maximally semi-formal, but the idea of this is to communicate with the reader and interest the reader. So the language that you choose has got to reflect that. Now, the structure is quite simple. You've got to have a short title, you've got to introduce the topic, and now we've got onto the body of the question. And here this is where you include the information which is in the question. So if you analyze the question and if you underline the most important parts, which I stress is hugely important, then this is the thing that you should identify. Paragraph 1 should include, which child are you? Are you the youngest? Are you the middle child? Are you the oldest child? And then that paragraph might also include the advantages and the disadvantages of your position in the family. Paragraph 2 would deal with the rest of the issues that you've got to include. Are there fewer or more siblings? Have you always felt this way? And then lastly, you've got the conclusion and the summary. And that's the basic structure for the FCE article. And you should be able to create something like that within a minute. If you can practice your skills, you can get this down to within a minute. Now, if you have a look just above my head, what I've got here is this weird looking graph. What this is, I'll quickly run through this. Past, present, future, simple, continuous, perfect, perfect, continuous, and here I've created a little grid. So when you're writing your answer, you can just put in a tick in the box to make sure that you've covered that area of grammar. Conditional 1, 2 and 3, relative pronouns, relative clauses, passive, active. So this is a very short or small guide to, when you fill it in, it shows you the range of grammar that you've included. And I'm not saying you have to include all of this. I'm just saying that this is good to have, and make sure that you tick in as many boxes as you can to show that you've covered a wide range of grammar. Now, if you remember Rubens Valera, you've got to introduce a short. You've got to have a short title to your article. So, and remember, you don't have to tell the truth. Okay, you don't have to tell the truth. The examiner doesn't know you're going to tell the truth. What you have to do is you have to interest the reader. So we're talking about families. Very often with families, being the middle child is not the best thing. Many people say that, many articles say that. So your short title could be something like this. Yes, being the middle child really does suck. Oops, spelling mistake there. Let's just go and correct that. Really does suck, exclamation mark. So here we've got informal language, personal language. The title communicates the idea of the article straight away. Introduce the topic. So what's this article about? What's the article about? So article about, there we go, question mark. So here you can have a few sentences where you try to put forward your point of view about what you think being a middle child is all about. And here you can use future forms. This is what I will do, this is what I will explain. You can use rhetorical question forms. Have you ever thought about being, have you ever wondered what being a middle child is like, or something like that, engaging the reader like this. You can even use a conditional form in this case. If you don't know what being a middle child is about, then let me tell you, let me give you my experiences. So there's a number of grammar structures that you can use to introduce the topic of your article. Now, onto the body of the question. Here you've got to make sure you deal with the bits you've underlined in the question. So which child are you? Clearly the article's about being a middle child, so let's use language to highlight the fact that you've said this. So you might say, as you've already guessed, I am the middle child. The key thing here is that you explicitly say which child you are. Now you've got to talk about the advantages and disadvantages. So here you can introduce some linkers to create order. So you could say, firstly, let me talk about the good things. Second, and then afterwards you would say, but on the other hand, or secondly, there are disadvantages. So you use linkers in this context to create a contrast between the advantages and the disadvantages, and there are many linkers that you can use in order to do that. And you can also use relative clauses in this area. So you can think of structures where you might say where or which or who, and you can come up with sentence structures with that. Similarly, there's scope for using the passive or the active voice as well. It's just a question of being able to think quickly using different forms of grammar, and this is part of the preparation process. Then you go on to paragraph 2. Now, what's the thing about the fewer things? Here, do you wish you had fewer or more siblings? Okay, so maybe we could have wish I had fewer more siblings. So I've just corrected my plan there. I've gone back to check what that is because my plan didn't make sense. I've now corrected it to make sure that I'm answering the correct question. Wish I had fewer more siblings. Here, you can ask yourself the question, do I wish I had more siblings? Do I wish I had less siblings? Or you could use a different form, whatever, to express the fact that you're thinking about having more or less siblings. Now, in the teacher's guide, it says you get a little bit extra credit for rephrasing or paraphrasing the question text. So there I've copied the question text directly. So, do I wish I had fewer or more siblings? But there are other ways to say that where you paraphrase this. So you might say something like, I've often thought about having more siblings, or you could say something like, I've never wanted extra siblings, or something like that. So you've got to think about ways that you can paraphrase that text. And that goes back to, and that links into the same skill set as the keyword transformation for the use of English paper, question 4. So you've got to answer that question, wishing that you had fewer or more siblings. And you be expressive. Say things like "no way," or you've got exclamation mark, or things. I would really love to have extra siblings. If you go back to Rubens Valero, and if you have a look at the other links which explain FCE articles, as you'll see in the video description below, you'll see that there's lots of emotive language that you can use. And similarly, you can use that emotive language for "always felt this way." But it's always good if you can introduce an element of discussion, or you can show an element of contrast in your answer. So, for example, "always felt this way." You could say, for example, "yes, I've always felt this way," or something similar. But you could say something like, "I felt this way at the beginning, but as I grew older, I realised that having extra siblings would help me," or something like this. Or, "I wish there was other middle children," or something like that. So you can look at a point and you can see, how can I introduce an element of discussion which looks at contrast or similarity in my answer. And you'll see when you practice that skill and you get better at that skill that we're not talking about 30 or 40 words. We're only talking about a few more words and a slightly longer, slightly more complex sentence. So that discussion automatically brings in linking words, transitions. It automatically brings in advanced sentence structures or less simple sentence structures, and it automatically lends itself to additional grammatical functions. So you can see how the discussion element actually really helps you develop a much more complex piece of writing. So that's paragraph 2, and then you've got a good conclusion or summary, and this is where you sum up your feelings on the topic, whether you've changed your mind, whether you still think being the middle child in this case sucks, or whether, and you might have a discussion here in the conclusion thinking maybe I was being a little bit too hard. In retrospect, being the middle child actually is quite good. So there are some websites that say know your conclusions before you write the rest of the article, and to a certain extent that makes sense. Some people say, some articles say know your conclusions and make sure your conclusions agree with the introduction. And from a logical point of view, that works, but everything works as long as you explain it and put everything into context. So your conclusion may disagree with your introduction as long as the context is explained and as long as it makes sense. The way that you lose marks is that if you write an introduction, the reader is thinking, okay, everything makes sense, and then you get to the conclusion which says something completely different. And then the reader is thinking, well, what's going on there? How does that work? And so the context, you've got to introduce the context correctly to make sure the reader doesn't get lost as the reader is going through the text. So that's a quick fly through the FCE article. I would encourage you to do the question by way of practice. Start using something like this that I've highlighted here to make sure that you can tick off ranges of grammar structures. And you can create your own version of this. I'll just move it up because it's behind my head a little bit. You can create your own version of this in a way that you can note it down, and it takes you around about 10 seconds to create. So you can, in 10 seconds of the 5-minute planning, you've got something where you can tick off lots of different things and you can say, okay, I've included that range of grammar. So that's the FCE article in a very short nutshell. So let's go on to the CAE proposal. Okay, so this is the CAE proposal question. It's from the link that you can see in brackets, which is also in the video description, and this is the question. The director of the local university has asked you to suggest improvements to the university library, which suffers from underuse and untidy organisation. Write a proposal including recommendations about how to attract more students to use it and to make it more user-friendly. Now, once again, the CAE proposal is a good question to tackle because it's incredibly formulaic. It has an established structure that you must use every single time. So that makes the planning process a lot easier. And you've got to remember that the proposal talks about the future. It doesn't concentrate on the past. It very, very quickly summarizes the present, but it always talks about the future, which means it's different to the report because the report focuses on the past and the present more than the future. So that's the CAE proposal, and of course the Rubens Valero website and other websites, which are linked to below, go through this structure and explain this structure very, very clearly. So let's have a look at that structure. And here is that structure. The structure I've taken directly from Rubens Valero and from other websites which say similar things. The sentences, some of the sentences I've used in my structure. For example, here, the principal aims, objectives of this proposal are to, and this one here, or in this one, following a student survey amongst university students. I've changed university students because it's relevant to this question. Unless these suggestions are implemented, it's unlikely there'll be any improvement in the short term. These are all sentences which are on the Rubens Valero website, and you can learn these off by heart as long as you apply them to the correct context. So here I've changed what was suggested on the website because it didn't fit the context, and you would have to use these pre-prepared sentences very carefully as long as to make sure you got the context correct. Now the structure is very established with proposals. As I said, you've got an introduction, you've got background information, you've got recommendation suggestion 1, attracting students. This is part of the question, and this is why you have to underline. Here we go. Attract more students to use it. Recommendation suggestion number 2, which then forms the paragraph structure. Making the library more user-friendly, which is here. This is why we underline the question. And then you've got conclusions and summary. And what I've done here is I've filled in the plan with some sentences and with some ideas. So the introduction can begin. The principal aims and objectives of this proposal are to set out suggestions of how we can improve the library, something along those lines. If you're good at creating different sentence structures, then this is a good way to use relative pronouns and relative clause structures. Because this is impersonal or semi-formal, it lends itself to passive structures, so you might be able to use a passive structure in here. And of course, if the focus is on the future and you can use a passive future structure, then kudos to you, and you're covering a lot of grammar points in the introduction already. Background information. Now you've got to invent some information from somewhere which provides the background for your proposal. So, for example, following a survey amongst university students, after having conducted interviews with XYZ, newspaper research has suggested. So we've covered lots of different grammar areas in just those 3 example sentences which create background information. You've got to have data which then supports your recommendations and suggestions. If you don't have that data, you don't create the context. And if you don't create the context, you're not communicating to the reader. These are all important points that I'll cover in a future writing video, probably week 11 or week 12 of this course, where I go through the marking structure and I tell you what the examiner is looking for in your writing answer. But generally speaking, it's enough to say now, if you go through the proposed structures for these writing exercises in the correct way, then you will create a lot of the things that the examiner is looking for purely through the planning process. Another reason why planning is so important. So we've created our data, we've created our context, which helps support the idea of a proposal to improve the library. Now, we've got recommendation suggestion number 1, and this is all about attracting students. So you've got to explicitly suggest this. I propose to attract students by ing is a nice structure. You can use a future structure. If we future with a future with conditional structure. If we aim to attract students effectively, we should use a modal in there as well. Make the conditional sexy. Don't just go through the standard conditional patterns. Conditionals are extremely flexible. Use modals to introduce different elements and ideas into your conditional structures. And with this, what you're doing is you're talking about the future, but you can also hypothesize about the future. You can say with certainty what will happen in the future. So you can use simple present simple forms. This will happen if, and so on. So think about how you can talk about the future. And what I've given you here is an easy way to attract students, and or rather I would say a more realistic way to attract students, and perhaps a more difficult way. What do I mean by that? Well, an easy way to attract students would just be about better communication. So the library can communicate better to its students, which is an easy thing to do. However, a harder thing to do, for example, would be to change the environment in the library to make it better, more conducive, that's a nice piece of vocab, more conducive to learning, which of course is a slightly bigger issue, which will cost more money, which will be harder to do, which will be longer to implement. So in that, I've created a discussion in which you can use linkers and contrast language and so on to highlight your point. So always look, as I said for the FCE article, always look for a way to introduce discussion, because if you introduce discussion, you will introduce linkers and context and a story, and the reader will be engaged. And just because it's a proposal doesn't mean it has to be dry, hard facts. People love being told a story, and this is very big now when it comes to business writing, legal writing, and professional writing in general. There's a huge focus. If, for example, have a look at the TED Talks about narrative in your writing, and people love stories. And stories can take place in lots of different writing forms. In this case, a proposal. A story could easily be created in the context of an article, as we've had a look at. So that's an advanced piece of writing information, but nevertheless, creating a discussion creates a narrative which engages the reader. And it's the same idea for recommendation, suggestion too. And of course, these are headers. These are headers. I forgot to say that. So introduction is a header. So underline that. Then we've got background information. You might want to call it something else. You might want to call data which supports development of the library. Something along those lines. Underline it. Recommendation suggestion 1, it could be how do we attract students, underline it. Recommendation suggestion 2, how do we making the library more user friendly, underline that. And then of course conclusion summary, underline that. So getting back to recommendation suggestion 2, which is making the library more user friendly. Once again, it's the same idea. I've created the potential for a discussion. So online book search could be quite simple to implement. This is just an online computer program. This could be quite easy to implement, whereas creating a full ebook library would be very, very beneficial, but would be a lot harder and a more costly exercise. So there's a discussion in there in which you can suggest two things, and you can argue one thing against the other. And then you've got your conclusion and summary, and here this is the last sentence which you may adapt of your conclusion and summary. But before this last sentence, you want to say, you want to give your recommendations and your proposals. So you've got to have an explicit communication of your opinion. So in a simple form, this would be I think, or I believe it would be best if you got to think up an explicit way of communicating what you think is a conclusion or summary. This is where you get out, once again, you don't have to tell the truth, you lie, whatever it is. What we're doing here is we're focusing on the language that you can use to show off the skills that you have. And there we go. So that is CAE proposals in a very short nutshell. Once again, you've got this guide here to make sure that you include a wide range of grammar. You've got the things to remember about the structure in as far as it's impersonal, semi-formal, focuses on the future. You've got an established structure for the proposal, which is very easy then just to fill in. And this plan can be done in less than 5 minutes, and in this you already know what you're going to write, you know what will be first, what will be second, and so on and so on. And of course, as you get better at this, in your plan you can put in different transitions, different linkers, different signposts which you think would be good in terms of telling the reader what you're presenting in your proposal. And with all of that being said, as well as the online questions that we had a look at today, if you've got one of these course books, this is what I would like you to do today. And remember, if you've signed up to CramTheExam.com, you can send me your writing work. I will mark it for you, give you some constructive criticism, and get it back to you so you can develop your writing skills. Amongst that, I will have a look at the structure that you will use if you're using a structure, and I'll give you constructive criticism, not just on your language that you use, but also the structure of your answer, to see if you're beginning to communicate what an examiner might want from your writing question. And as I'm sure you already know from all the other videos I've done, you can get access to CramTheExam for 30 Zwots for 1 month's access. If you want 3 months access, I can give you a textbook. These are the details just over my shoulder of how much it would be. 75 Zwots in Poland. Please go through my Allegro shop. You'll find a link in the video description below. If you're outside of Poland but in EU zone, then I can get it to you for 105 Zwots, which is still a whole lot cheaper than you can buy just the coursebook on your home eBay sites. If you want to find out what my website is all about, then there is a link that actually shows you what's in my website. So what's waiting for you when you log in, and the wide range of video resources to help you develop your skills at home so you can self-study and do as many exam questions as you want, as you get access to video materials for all of the course books above my head for that same amount, that same monthly or 3 monthly fee. So here are those questions one more time. If you've got any questions at all about this video or about any of those questions or the online free questions, leave a comment below. I will get back to you. Tomorrow is Tuesday, which means it's listening day, so I'll be back tomorrow with some more free online listening exercises and listening exercises that I'd like you to do from your coursebook. I'll see you soon.